the only convict sent to death row not once, but twice, for different crimes, Joseph Mad Dog Taborski. He was born on March 23, 1924, in Hartford, Connecticut. Taborsky first came to Connecticut's death row for the 1950 murder of Louis Wolfson, a West Hartford liquor store owner, during a robbery. His younger brother Albert, who was also his co-conspirator, testified against Taborsky at the trial in exchange for a life sentence. In 1955, the Connecticut Supreme Court reversed Taborsky's conviction and death sentence. Because the sole witness against him, Albert, was incurably insane. Because there were no other witnesses to the robbery and murder of Wolfson, Taborsky could not be tried again. Thus, he was freed from death row, after less than 3 years, in early October 1955. After his release from prison, Taborsky met another felon, Arthur Meatball Kilomby, who would become his accomplice during the Mad Dog killings. In one grocery store robbery, a 3-year-old girl was running around the store as Taborsky beat her grandparents unconscious. When Taborsky ordered Kilomby to shoot the girl, Kilomby hid her beneath a deli case, told the girl to be quiet, and fired a shot into the floor. Taborsky left, believing that the girl was dead. Because of this incident, his low IQ, and his cooperation with the authorities, Kilomby was given a life sentence. Taborsky, however, received the death penalty on June 27, 1957. He thereby became the only convict sent to Connecticut's death row on 2 separate occasions for 2 separate crimes. Before his execution, he would also confess to the 1950 murder of Wolfson. Louis Wolfson was killed on March 23, 1950. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the face. Edward Krupewski and Daniel Yanofsky were killed on December 15, 1956. They were both shot in the back of the head. Samuel Cohen was killed on December 26, 1956. He was killed by a gunshot wound to the chest. Bernard Buster Spare and Ruth Spare were killed on January 5, 1957. Both shot in the head. John M. Rosenthal was killed on January 26, 1957. Like Cohen, he was shot in the chest. A little more than a year later, shop owners started dying around Hartford again, a wave of terror dubbed the Mad Dog killings by the press. First, during an ice storm on December 15th, a tailor in Hartford was shot in the head and neck, but survived. A New Britain gas station attendant, Edward Krupewski, and his customer, Daniel Yanofsky, both 30, were not so lucky. Both died of bullet wounds to the head. The killers spared Yanofsky's 14-month-old daughter. A bus driver found the bodies and the terrified little girl the next morning. 11 days later, December 26th, liquor store owner Sam Cohn died of a gunshot wound during a holdup. Then on January 5th, a tall man entered an East Hartford shoe store, asked for a pair of size 12 seconds, then pistol-whipped the proprietor. During the robbery, Bernard and Ruth Spare made the unlucky decision to go shoe shopping, and paid with their lives, both dying with bullets in their brains. Almost a month later, pharmacist Jack Rosenthal was murdered in his drugstore, shot in the chest. Detectives focused on the one solid clue they had, the assailant's size 12 feet. They started by checking the shoe sizes of every Connecticut ex-con. Police were not surprised to learn that Taborsky was one of the Bigfoots. Police brought him in, along with Arthur Kilomby, whose photo had been picked out by the shoe store owner as his assailant's accomplice. He could not make a positive identification, however, when shown Taborsky's mugshot, despite his lantern jaw that had earned him the street sobriquet the Chin. Kilomby quickly confessed to 8 holdouts, involving 6 murders. But he insisted he had only been along for the ride, and that Taborsky did the killing, cackling as he fired the fatal shots, usually into his victims' faces or heads. Taborsky stayed tight-lipped for days, but then he cracked, confessing to being behind the recent killing spree. And, oh, he added, he also was the guy who shot Louis Wolfson back in 1950. After a 9-week trial, 5 of which were consumed in trying to pick an impartial jury, Taborsky and Kilomby were found guilty, and sentenced to die in the chair. Kilomby's sentence was commuted to life. But the state of Connecticut would not make the same mistake twice by granting clemency to Taborsky. It seemed like old times when Joseph Taborsky landed on Connecticut's death row in May 1957. He had been there before. The first time was because of his little brother's big mouth. The second time, he had no one to blame but his own big feet. His second stay on death row would be his last, and his execution would be the last one in the state until 2005. Taborsky willed his body to science and his eyes to the eye bank, and remained calm to the end. On the day of his execution, May 17, 1960, he asked for a big banana split and a cherry soda as his last meal, and bid farewell to his fellow doomed men. In parting, he told one particularly impressionable inmate, Ben Reed, 20, that he was going to come back as a big fly. And so it could be argued that Taborsky made one more trip to death row. Just moments after the execution, Reed went berserk. He said a fly had appeared on his wall at the time of Taborsky's death, and Reed was convinced he had been visited by the spirit of the Mad Dog killer. Reed was hospitalized for 3 months for psychiatric care. He went absolutely berserk. The most remarkable thing about Taborsky's execution is that Taborsky didn't stop it. Right up until the end, Taborsky, who had waived all appeals, could have stopped the whole thing at the last minute by saying he'd changed his mind. Instead, Taborsky walked down the line of cells that made up death row saying goodbye to the other inmates. He even shook hands with Kilomby, who had dodged the chair by ratting out his partner. He was strapped down, the metal helmet placed over his head. It looked like a mixing bowl, and the black mask draped over his face. The executioner pulled the switch. Taborsky's body thrashed in the chair, and his hair burst into flame. 3 jolts later, a guard tore open his shirt for the stethoscope. Taborsky's skin was blue. At 10:36 p.m. Joseph Taborsky was dead. And somebody somewhere got Joseph Taborsky's eyes. Thank you for watching Death Row.